BAM Radio Network.
Excuse me, she said, but what did you think Jimmy said? And she told me, and I looked at the rest of the students and I said, is that what he said? And they're like, that's exactly what he said. It had nothing to do with racism.
John Harper here. Welcome to My Bad, the show about how and what extraordinary educators learn from sharing their own mistakes. Today on My Bad, I'm speaking with LaVonna Roth. LaVonna, as you know, My Bad is all about sharing big mistakes. So I'm just going to jump right into it and have you start off with sharing a big mistake that you feel comfortable sharing with the audience.
Oh, John, there's one particular time that comes to mind, and that was when I was teaching middle school. And I had all of the students sitting in front of me, and we were going through a lesson, and they were sitting on the floor. And I particularly remember one of my boys who loved to have a good time, be the class clown, have a blast, and say things that weren't always appropriate. He made a comment, and I thought what I heard to myself was that he called me a racist. And yeah. And I am someone who believes so much in being fair to everybody and everybody being, that's not me at all. I'm just gonna put it that way. It's not me at all. And I remember my blood pressure boiling. This was my second year of teaching. And I turned to him and I lit into him. I was furious and I embarrassed him in front of all of the kids because he had embarrassed me. That was my mindset at the time. And I kicked him out of my classroom. Well, I continued on with the lesson and trying to let myself calm down when another student raised her hand and she said, excuse me, she said, but what did you think Jimmy said? And I said, well, I'm not going to share what I thought he said. And she's like, well, I think you may have misunderstood him. And I said, really? And I said, well, why don't you tell me what he said? And she told me. And I looked at the rest of the students and I said, is that what he said? And they're like, that's exactly what he said. It had nothing to do with racism. But the comment, actually the word rhymed, and the way it was said, apparently that's what I heard. So, John, I went out into the hallway, dragging my feet and tears streaming down my face. And I said, Jimmy, I am so, so sorry. He's like, Miss, I never said that to you. I don't know why you thought I said that, but I would never say that. I have such respect for you. I love your class. And he went on and on. I was like, no, stop. It is me that I owe you the huge apology, and I am so sorry. And tears are streaming down my face. Now he's one comforting me and giving me a hug. Right. It was a terrible moment. So I went back into the classroom and I apologized in front of all of the students about it because I realized in that moment that I had let my emotion take over. And instead of confirming and having a conversation with the child, instead I chose to lay into him and embarrass him like he embarrassed me, which turned out to be literally my bad.
So, LaVonna, what did he say? I mean, if he didn't say you were a racist, what did he say?
Well, that's the crazy part is I don't remember what the word was because I was so horrified that I had completely misinterpreted him and embarrassed him in front of everybody. So, yeah, I wish I remembered, but I don't.
Sometimes, why did you jam him up and kick him out? Why didn't you ask him?
Yeah, that's a great question, but I think you hit the nail on the head that it's in your first few years, especially I think when you're teaching older students, you tend to think you have to prove yourself even more and really show that you are the so-called authority. And again, my mindset then is different than the verbiage I'm using now. Or, it was totally different, but I just remember I'm very big into treating my students fair. And I've had multiple students over the years say to me, I've never had a teacher treat me fairly. I've never, like you did, I've never had a teacher look past my color. That has literally been said to me. And it's one of those things that I hold very dear to my heart because I do believe in seeing everybody equally. And so when that comment was said to me, it completely pushed a huge value button with me and I went off. And that's one of the things I would say, I think sometimes age also can play a part in that. And that's something that now I don't ever, I know so much more and understand so much more about people's stories and experiences that if someone were to say that to me now, it would be more of a clarification, but it'd also be, can you tell me why you think that? Because I do believe in the power of questions. And that's where I didn't go to at first, where now that is my go-to.
How did it change you at that moment? I'm sure later on, because I'm sure you said it was your second year, you were young. I'm sure you went home, reflected. You were probably embarrassed about what you did and you lost it. We've all done that. But did that change you from that day on? I'm not saying that you were a totally different person, but how did that change you going forward?
Well, that was the moment that I decided I need to find out for sure when a student says something or does something that I needed to know more about it, not jump to an assumption. And I should have known better, John, because I had such a great relationship with my students. But it was such a button pusher for me. And throughout the rest of the years of teaching, that has been a button for me is when a student would say, "That's not fair." Well, that to me was a comment saying I wasn't being fair. And that's a huge piece for me because I believe in treating everybody, like I said, equally and wanting students to feel that they belong no matter what.
Well, no, it's tough because that's one thing I know when someone questions our integrity, it hurts a lot. And right away, we want to defend ourselves. And sometimes, like you just mentioned, it's good to ask a question of them instead of just denying it right away. Say, okay, why do you feel that way? Because, I mean, when my integrity is questioned, I mean, I've been called a racist as an administrator. Sometimes I have to make decisions and I'll hear someone say, well, my mom says you're a racist or this or that. And I don't react. And I probably should ask more questions because it is important for me to know why do they feel that way. And sometimes it's out of anger and sometimes it might be out of a misunderstanding. But I mean, that's a good point you made, definitely.
Right. And sometimes they're saying it to cover some other uncommunication that they have. So that's their reaction. It doesn't necessarily mean that they mean it. And, another time I could say that I was actually sitting with a whole group of teachers, and my daughter had been diagnosed with ADD a couple years prior to that, and I decided to do a 504. And when I was sharing the information and I asked for one of the modifications that she have additional time, one of the teachers said, well, that's not fair. And that was another moment where I immediately felt, in this case, it would be Mama Bear, want to come rise up to say, why, there's that word again with me. And I, at that moment, stopped and I looked at her and I said, because again, I believe in the power of questions. That's something I learned so long ago. And that whole part with Jimmy was a piece of that, was that I looked at her and I said, well, why do you think that's not fair? And the interesting thing
is
that's
a good response, because I'll be honest, I would have gone off. But I guess the person you were your second year of teaching, I mean, it's hard not to go off. I'm sure inside you were going off, but you're like, okay, I better ask this person a question before I go across this table right now. Because
exactly. And so it's interesting because I do believe in the power of questions. When I asked that, the conversation that followed, I asked another question after that. And the thing is that I didn't actually disagree with what she was saying. We were just coming at it from two different sides. And so again, that was just affirming to me, like, LaVonna, don't react like you're taking it personally when it's not personal at this point, because either one, it could be wrong, or it could be coming from their viewpoint, their experience, or what they mean, not what I'm taking it as.
No, absolutely. So I guess in the closing minute, I mean, what's advice you have to others? Because people listening to this episode are going to feel attacked. They're going to feel like their integrity is attacked and their emotions are going to boil. How do we, in that moment, and it's very hard to control things in the moment, how do we in that moment not react, not kick a kid out of class, not go off on someone who thinks that our child shouldn't have a 504? How do we stay under control?
Well, I do think one of the critical pieces is to remember that you don't always have to handle everything right in the moment in that situation. Because like when you look at the brain and when it goes into an emotional state, the blood flow literally pulls back from the frontal lobes where you do your logical thinking and reasoning. And it goes into high emotion, and in some instances, it goes into the way back fight, flight, freeze mode. And so if the student has said something that they're emotional about, or you get drawn in emotionally, neither of you are now in a thinking state. So thinking to say, you know what, I need to handle this and have a deeper conversation or a conversation with you about it to find out more about what just happened or what was said. That allows you the time for both of you to de-escalate and get into a thinking mode to actually have a logical conversation, if that makes sense.
No, that does. Well, you went all scientific on us. I like that. Okay. That was good, and that's true.
Neuroscience, neuropsychology, and that's what I talk about.
No, I mean, that's good because, I mean, I remember hearing a quote from a movie one time that anger distorts judgment. And I mean, it's true. When you're angry, you don't make good decisions. I mean, that's so true. So I'm going to leave it at that. I mean, I think making decisions when you're angry is bad. And sometimes, one of our school rules is if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything. And I try to say that. I say that in my house. I say that at school. I try to say it to myself. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I don't take my own advice. But, when we're angry, things come out of our mouth that we regret. And obviously on that day, you overreacted, as we all have. And that's tough. I mean, I'm sure you felt bad. I'm sure you felt bad for a while about that. It's interesting that your class felt confident enough with you to say, Ms. Roth, what do you think he said? Because a lot of times the class would just sit silent and be like, oh, snap, she's just sitting him out in the hallway. I'm not going to say another word. But they felt confident enough in you
Right. And I'm thankful for that. And to me, that's the number one thing I talk about is relationships. And the number one thing I believe in when it comes to students is having that relationship and trust factor with each other. And that's what I to this day, I can still feel the emotion that I had the moment that I thought he said it and the moment that I realized he didn't. And that has stuck with me all these years. It's something I will never forget because I still feel like I need to continue apologizing to him. By going back to also what was said about remembering to put yourself in thinking states, it also implies with colleagues when you're upset with a colleague or, someone who's higher authority than you in a hierarchy setting, at spouse at home, your own child. Like there's so many scenarios to remember that in.
Absolutely. I'm going to take that advice. That's it. LaVonna, I want to thank you so much for coming on My Bad. Thanks for checking out My Bad today. Hope it was as good for you as it was for me. And if it wasn't, my bad. Catch you next time.
This program is produced by Accretive Media for the BAM Radio Network. Thanks for listening.